Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm Rachel Astarte. My guest today is D. Neil Elliott. He is a professional engineer with an MBA, and his new book, A Higher Road, Cleanse Your Consciousness to Transcend the Ego and Ascend Spiritually, shares his story and his process to inner joy, peace, and love. Neil, thank you so much for being on Self Talk.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our conversation today.
I know, I've been looking forward to it for some time, so let's dive right in. So tell us a little bit about your background. First of all, I'm very excited to talk about the book, but let's back it up a little bit. How did you get to this point in your life to write this book?
Yeah, okay. So I am currently 61 years or almost 62. I was born in 1960 and professional engineer, MBA, as you mentioned. And just, what happened was over a lifetime, my patterns of thinking and feeling that, shaped in childhood and then I reinforced, took me to a place in 2015 of this really deep, despondent depression and a questioning about life. Like I was at a place where it's like, what's the purpose of life? Why are we here? It seems so pointless. I'm miserable inside. I'm successful, but I'm miserable inside. And that took me to sitting down and crafting a suicide note. And a few events happened around that got pushed out a little bit because of some new material I received that helped me bridge this gap between spirituality and science. And that's what I like to share with people.
Yeah, and that phrase, spirituality and science, is one of my favorites. So I'd love to definitely talk more deeply about that. So if you could, and I know this might be a difficult question, but what is your book, A Higher Road, about?
Oh, it's essentially, it's really my story, my life story, and how I use the mechanisms of creation itself to create every event and every experience that came into my life. And I share the new knowledge that I gained that really bridged this gap between spirituality and science using science-based information that we know today that we didn't know 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And then that just it laid this foundation for me to have this spiritual awakening.
Yeah. And when you say the new science we didn't know, are you referring to physics, for example, quantum physics, or what kind of science?
Yeah. So and we can talk a whole lot about this, but I'm referring to, so we know some things in quantum physics, yes. And I'm not using quantum physics in this explanation in what I share with people. I'm sharing something a little more basic in terms of, what we know. For example, what we know in science today is that at a subatomic level, we're all just energy.
Right.
And we did not know that before. So it's those kinds of concepts. So what I share in A Higher Road is not mathematical formulas and things like that engineers love. It is really around concepts that everybody can understand. And it provides, because we know it, or for me anyway, because I knew it, we understand it, we could observe it, we can calculate it. It provides this foundation to enable us to make this leap to this new spiritual knowledge I gained that allows us to actually make this final connection and experience a spiritual awakening.
Right. And it's so beautiful because it's grounded in science. And the more it seems to me, I wonder what you think about this, but the more we look at science in a way, the more spiritual it becomes in many ways, because there's so much beautiful mystery in it. And but let's talk about spirituality and spiritual awakening. So what do you mean in the book when you talk about spiritual awakening? What does that mean for you?
So what that means for me is a spiritual awakening for me was to get to a point where I could actually make a direct connection with our source of our being. So the source of our being radiates unconditional love to all of us unstintingly.
Mm.
And it is so such a high frequency of vibration and so spiritually refined that it cannot enter into us and let us, make itself known to us until we actually raise the vibrational frequency of our human consciousness to actually allow it to penetrate into us and let itself be known to us. And when that happens and you grow in this process that I followed, you will feel this inflow of spiritual energy. And at some point, you will recognize and understand it and know that what you now know is true.
Mm.
And when that happens, your life changes.
Yeah.
And it is, for lack of a better word, we do not have the human language to actually describe this, what you feel. It's about feeling. And it is just, it's magical.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. It's magical. It's the only word that, kind of comes to mind.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, okay. And I definitely want to get into the meatiness of that. Let's talk for a second though about, you were in a really dark place. You were in that, I think you said you were 57 when you were suicidal, and something came into your life that that shifted. I mean, when you're at that point where it's better to maybe just not be here or to reset, it takes a lot to come back from that edge. I say that as a therapist, but also someone who has suffered from depression and certainly know others who have as well. What was it that came into your life, that new knowledge that you talked about, that really transformed your thinking? What knowledge did you receive?
So very briefly, so I share all of this in A Higher Road, but very briefly, I leveraged this foundation of what we know in science today. Things like, for example, at a subatomic level, we're all just energy.
Right.
And this new information describes very clearly and articulately what was before the Big Bang, what happened at the time of the Big Bang, how the material universe came to being, and then the mechanisms that we use moment to moment in our lives to create every event and every experience that comes into our life. Mm-hmm. It also describes the purpose that we're here, why we're reincarnated so many times, what the soul's purpose is in this reincarnation. Mm-hmm. And then because it describes how and why we use the mechanics of electromagnetism through our thinking and our feeling to create these blueprints of future experiences that we magnetize to ourselves through corresponding magnetic emotion. You can go back when you actually understand all of this, and it happens slowly. The spiritual words of enlightenment are not fully comprehended nor understood by the human mind in a quick way. And so when you take the time with this and you understand it, you can see how we use the mechanics of creation, the laws of the universe that create every experience in our life. We can go back, we can analyze the patterns of thinking and feeling that we adopted over a lifetime, and how we attract these events that come into our life. And they're all meant to teach us a lesson. They're all meant to teach our soul a lesson. And when your soul finally wakes up and understands what it's doing to itself over many lifetimes of reincarnation, when you have this process and you have this knowledge, you can start to go through this process that raises your vibrational frequency, your human consciousness, and you can meet with the consciousness of the divine. And you need to understand the difference between universal consciousness, divine consciousness, and human consciousness. And when
Mm,
you understand these things and the mechanics of the universe, you can actually make a conscious choice to live life as you currently do
yeah.
or make this change. And
Mm.
when you make this change, I promise you, it is totally magical. It is amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So if you could, and maybe I'm not sure if you can answer this question because our language is very limited, but what are some, when I'm thinking about the listeners absorbing everything that you're saying, and I can just see them kind of nodding because that's this audience, um, when we think about being in the present, making those choices you were talking about moment to moment, what can we do to receive and the information that's coming to us and then make that choice or that or create um, those pathways for ourselves moment to moment, so that we can be living at that higher frequency regardless of what goes on in our life.
Great question. So there's a process, and again, I share this in A Higher Road. There's a process that you need to go through to, as soon as you can understand where we come from and why we're here,
Mm-hmm.
and you understand how we create all of this painful misery and agony and sorrow in our lives, and take full responsibility for that. And you will, once you understand these mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a process that you need to go through to cleanse your consciousness and then rebuild it with the golden aspirations of divine consciousness that you will learn as you gain this new knowledge. And you need to go into a state of meditation and do this on a daily basis. You can start with 10 minutes and go to whatever time works for you. I spend about 90 minutes to 2 hours every morning without fail meditating.
Okay.
And it is the most precious and wonderful time of
Mhm.
any day.
Yeah.
And over time, what happens is you'll grow new brain cells underneath your skull at the top of your head. They'll be impressed with new knowledge, and you will get this spiritual inflow of energy. And when this happens, you start to let it direct your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it is unconditional love. And when you are directed by unconditional love, you'll learn these mechanisms of the ego and how we let the ego take control of our life. And when you actually understand how and why the ego was created and how it creates this negativity in our life,
Mm-hmm.
and then you let the spiritual inspiration come into you and this energy, it will start to impress upon you the benefit, if you will, for lack of a better word, of letting it start to direct your life.
Mm.
And then when you're actually analyzing how you are behaving throughout the day, you know when your ego has taken control of something,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to this point where you are asking for the divine to enter into you and give you direction and inspiration in every event and every experience in their life.
Beautiful.
And for example, when you understand these mechanisms, so I'll jump right to me. When I look at a person today, I see them as their soul being equal to my soul, being unconditional love, and anything that they are doing in that I may find negative or reprehensible or something I certainly wouldn't do. I
Mm-hmm.
understand it is their path to the light. It is their ego taking control of their life and
Mm-hmm.
causing these things that happen in their life for them to learn the lessons they need to learn.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. I love that. And I wanted to talk about the ego for a second because um in our culture, and anyone who studies, any kind of psycho-spiritual work, it seems that the word ego gets a bad rep. And so if we don't want the ego to have a bad rap, then we might say something like, well, let me ask you, do you believe the ego and the spirit or soul work in conjunction with one another, ideally?
So the ego is a tool of creation to to split divine consciousness into individuality out of its wholeness. The ego can only work through the mechanics of bonding with everything that it likes. I like chocolate cake. I like this car. I like this house. Or rejecting things it doesn't. I don't like that person. I don't like that event. I don't want to go there. I don't live there. These are the only mechanics of the ego. They are electromagnetic in nature. They are many times contrary to unconditional love. So essentially what you need to do is you need to follow this process to cleanse yourself of these negative ego drives. Let the divine take control of your life and your responses and your thinking. It is not what you necessarily what you say and do, although that's important. If you think that nutritional health is good for your body, and it is, the right nutritional foods, what you think about, you think with an electrical impulse in the brain, you feel with magnetic impulses in the nervous system. Everything that you think is a consciousness plan. It is a movement in consciousness and consciousness in movement. And the ego is designed to help your soul in an evolutionary process for you to have multiple experiences in varying genders, varying races, varying places of origins and culture, and learn from those experiences until you wake up to the fact that letting your ego be in control will create all these negative things in your life. Your goal over over many lifetimes is to get to this place where you transcend your ego. You do not let your ego is divinely ordained to protect you and to draw everything into your life that you need to survive.
Right.
But when it is let to run amok and run on its own, it creates all of these other things that come into your life that we find to be, not good for us or unhappy or we don't want.
Right.
And what we need to learn is that love dons many masks in its loving attempt to help those wake up to the fact of what they're doing and to help them go beyond that and connect back with the divine. Your goal is to connect back with the divine and that let it have full scope throughout your mind and body. And when you do this and when you transcend your ego in whichever lifetime that is, when you leave that lifetime, your body will return to dust, your soul will move on, and you will not have to be reincarnated again. And that's when your life really begins.
Interesting.
Right here, we are here just to learn.
Right. And I love that too, because when I work with patients who have issues with other people in their lives, right? And sometimes it's someone they don't know, or someone they cut them off in traffic, or it might be someone very close to them, a parent or a spouse or whatever. It's very hard to practice what you just described, which is to see that everyone is here, spiritual beings having a human experience, that we're all here to learn whatever lesson we're here to learn. And it may be very different from yours, and it certainly may not be on the same timeline as you. And so to be able to release other human beings to their own journeys is a practice, and it sounds like you're saying the process that's laid out in your book maybe helps to develop that a little more deeply, would you say?
Well, yes. And I'm going to go beyond it's a practice. It is, you can't do it by yourself. If you are using your willpower to try and think differently and break up what we have programmed in our subconscious mind, in the end, your willpower, your ego will win. You need the divine to enter into you and use its will within you. And that's what this process is about. It is to open you up and make this connection back with the divine so that it can actually make itself be known to you And then it can help you through this process of breaking up and dissolving these patterns of thinking that you have programmed in your subconscious mind,
Mm-hmm.
and return back to having patterns that are consistent with our creator. And so, you know, if you try to do it with yourself and your own willpower of doing it, it's like trying to clean up a spill of molasses with molasses.
Right.
And
Right.
so when you actually get the divine to enter into you
Mm-hmm.
and help you with this process, it will help you along your path of doing the cleansing. And there's a very specific cleansing and rebuilding that you need to do. And that's what's all of this information is described in the book.
Beautiful. So you also mentioned in the book that it really doesn't matter what your current situation is or what challenges you might be going through, you know, whether you have money or you don't have money, or you're happy or you're depressed, that you can still benefit from this. And so does, I mean, I don't even like to ask this question because I mean, again, it sounds like an ego question, but how long does the process take, and how, you know, and like, when can I expect full enlightenment? You know what I mean?
So,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So very quickly on that, you know, first off, it's only through lessons of suffering will a journeying soul gain self-knowledge to retain individuality after discarding the ego. The process is going to be very dependent on that person and where they are in their spiritual journey. So for me, I was, you know, sat down, crafted this suicide note, planning this suicide note. This material came to me after this science foundation was laid for me. And it took 7 months of continuous practice for me to start to feel this little opening at the top of my head. And then it took me another couple months as that opening began to grow. And then I started to feel the spiritual inflow of energy. At 13 months, I had 2 meditations that I went into, and you shift through higher vibrational frequencies of consciousness as you do these meditations. And as a very high level of consciousness where the divine entered into me. I'll call it the divine. You can call it whatever you want. The Tao, the Yahweh, entered into me, and I was just bathed in unconditional love. I was not judged. I felt fully supported. I didn't care what ailments my body had. I didn't care what anybody had done to me in the past. I didn't care about anything. I just wanted to stay in that state. And I had 2 of these within 2 days of each other. And I can tell you, as soon as that happened to me, I knew that what I now knew at that time from all this knowledge I gained, that it was true.
Yeah.
And at that point, then my life changed. So I'm now in my 4th year, maybe my 5th year even, of this process. And it just gets better and better and better. It is totally amazing.
Beautiful. Yeah. When you described the unconditional love aspect and yes, that dissolution of the ego, it did. And I know you mentioned this a little bit in the book very early on, and maybe even later, but that it reminded me very much of a near-death experience of people who have experienced what it's like to die, and then they feel that unconditional love and know it to be true. And
yes,
yeah.
And so in A Higher Road, I actually share a near-death experience, not mine, but somebody else's by another author. And they have a very apt description of what they experienced in a 24-hour period. And that to me was part of this process of stretching my understanding of what consciousness is. So I'll give you a little spoiler alert. We are not matter imbued with consciousness. We are consciousness made visible through the descent of vibrational frequency of electrical particles.
Yes.
Everything that you see, touch, feel, know is consciousness made visible. There's nothing solid. We know this. There's nothing solid. Even though we perceive it as solid, there's nothing solid. But you are here in this duality to learn. Your soul needs to learn the lessons that it needs to learn. And you at some point will wake up and understand that you are actually part of creation.
Yeah.
And when you do this and you make this connection, then you kind of live in these two different worlds. You are here to experience the things you experience, and anything that has been put in motion through your individual thinking or our collective thinking will
Mm-hmm.
come into form. It is a law of the universe.
Yeah.
And so when you start this process and things that are coming to you that you still consider to be negative or bad or you don't want, you
Mm-hmm.
actually look at them and go, oh, I put that in motion, 10 years ago. I can see
Right.
that from my thinking. And so you view that experience as, oh, what am I meant to learn from this experience?
Mm-hmm.
And your whole life changes. How I view things, how I see things, who I talk to, the language I use, it's all transformed.
Right.
It is
Right.
totally, it is, like I said earlier, it's totally magical. It is an amazing process. And I just want to share this with everybody for them
Okay.
to make their own decision. There's no right or there's no wrong. It's just
Right.
you make your own decision.
Right. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the earth. Thank you,
Yeah.
Rumi. So yeah, and that I think says a lot too. And I can hear too, or I'm sensing the listeners, like, oh, I see, because something really rang true when you said that. Oh, this is something that I don't want in my life, but I see how I brought it into play by having a belief system or having, negative self-talk or whatever it is, coming from childhood and coming from the experience, and maybe even uh, intergenerationally, that we were carrying a lot of stuff with us. And so finding that process to release what, that release the stories that we're holding, that are keeping us vibrating more slowly, I think. Yeah, I think I got that right. Yeah, okay,
Yep, you have that right. Our
good.
human consciousness is at a very low level of vibrational frequency.
Right, okay, got it.
And you need to be able to raise that. But in order to do that, you need to have some new knowledge and you need a process. And when you have that and you understand it, you can do this.
Right. And is that what you refer to as the evolution of the soul? Is that the same thing? Or how would
So
you
the
describe?
evolution, so the soul, when you're, imagine this, as a soul, you are infused in this conception process. The ego is created at the time of conception, and the soul's infused. And this is for not only people, but every animal, from a hornet to a hippopotamus, from the lowest cell amoeba to the human.
Mm-hmm.
The ego's created to help us learn these lessons. So as a soul, maybe you jump into a yellow pond, you come out all yellow, and you are educated to live a yellow life. Your religion, your culture, your gender, you might be male or female in that one. The next time so when you leave that lifetime, you have much in you that is yellow.
Mm-hmm.
The next time you jump into a red pool, you come out with the red mixed with the yellow, and you are educated, and you have a religion to learn red lives, and it just goes on and on and on until you finally wake up to the fact that you are tired of all of these color combinations, and you begin this process to shed the yellow, to shed the red, to shed the blue, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
until you step back out into the light, and you're the pureness, the light of your soul shines through, and you transcend your ego.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this evolutionary process for your soul to experience all these varying experiences. If you imagine the divine, the universal and the divine to be unconditional love, and that's all it is unconditional love, the only way it can experience itself is to go through a process that it's created of allowing souls to be incarnated into these experiences, to have all these other feelings of anger and hate
Yes.
and misery and depression. And we think we are creators, we think we know better than our source of our being.
Right.
And really all we're doing is we're trying to get back. Your soul is continually prompting the psyche to get back to the place that it came from. But your ego can only use these mechanisms of electromagnetism, bonding and rejection, to create the experiences that it has in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I described this, how I unwittingly, unknowingly, and ignorantly use these things to manifest a $60,000 hardtop convertible Lexus in my life. And I explain exactly how I did that and what I did every day that did that. And I did it unknowingly and ignorantly. I didn't even know it was part of the lottery. Later in my book, I describe the mechanisms of the laws of creation in terms of how we act, what I actually did that manifested this car into my life. We do this with everything that we consider to be good and everything we consider to be bad or negative.
Yeah.
And collectively, we pollute our consciousness streams through the media we watch and the TV we watch and the films and what we read. And we have created all kinds of things that are going to come into form that we don't even know we've created.
Yeah.
And they're not going to necessarily be pretty.
Right.
But it is the process of this there's a new dispensation of energy around the globe that is helping us transition and helping more people wake up.
Yes. Yep.
And but it's going to get worse before it gets better.
100% agree. And that just makes it all the more important for us to take this time to really do the work that we need to do, that you're speaking about, to recognize what we truly are and where we truly come from. And I wanted to add just a tiny little thing to that too, about what it means to be fully human, and what it means to say, yes, in the non-dual, our home of non-duality, where creation is, where great mystery is, or great spirit, God, whatever. There is no need for anger or jealousy or bliss or, whatever, general happiness or contentment. Those are all shards of the entire whole. When we're human, we do get to experience all of these things, which is a blessing in itself. But it's really important, much like the dance between the ego and the spirit, not to cling to any of them. It's lovely to be able to feel joy or to even feel sadness as a human being, and to also understand that simultaneously we are connected to the divine as well, and that when we do reabsorb that, and return home, as I like to call it, we don't necessarily have the need for those experiences. And we could talk all day about that, but I think it's also lovely to say, isn't it a lovely blessing while we're here to be able to experience and hold the flavors of each of these emotions while we can,
Well, so I think that I'm going to say this slightly differently than you. It's probably the same thing. But I'm going to say that your soul is learning from this process and enjoying this process and maybe even laughing about this process.
Right.
Your ego is in misery and pain, or happy and joyful, and it doesn't realize that it's going through this process. It's just experiencing life. Mm-hmm. And when you return, there are none of these other things you've talked about. There's only unconditional love.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And so, you will, as a soul, your soul will say, your soul's a fragment of divine consciousness and unified in the divine. And when you go back, all of these experiences enrichen the divine. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But are not in the divine, if you understand what I mean.
Got it. Yep.
So, I think that, embracing it while you're here, I think that you can have an entirely different perspective of your experiences when you actually understand all of these mechanisms and mechanics of the universe. And
Hmm.
when you actually understand that and the divine enters into you, you just view everything differently.
Yeah.
I no longer see it as good and bad. You know,
Right.
there's things that I get that I go, "Oh, okay, I'm not really totally happy about that," but I totally look at it and go, oh, what am I meant to learn from this? This is kind of cool. You know, this is an
Precisely.
interesting thing.
Yeah.
I'm feeling miserable and I'm feeling painful, but there's a lesson here for me to learn. It's an
Mm.
opportunity
Yes.
for me to transcend it. It's an opportunity for me to go back to love. How do I bring unconditional love to this situation?
Yeah.
A
I
totally
love
different
it.
way to view the world.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. Um, I love that. And that's a great place, I think, for us to transition to. How do people get this book, Neil?
It's available. It's available on ebook, print in Amazon or through your local bookstores. You probably have to order it, but Amazon readily available. It's available globally.
Beautiful. And I will make sure that we have links in the show notes. And you have a website as well. Can you please share what that is?
So, you know, so my website is dneilelliott.com, but
Mhm.
another easy way to get to that, which is my author website, is ahigherroad.com.
Beautiful. Okay. And again, I'll make sure all the links are in the show notes. D. Neil Elliott, thank you so much for being a guest on Self Talk today. This has been amazing.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure, and you know, I'm hoping that people will pick up my book and read it. And if it doesn't work for them, please just pass it on to somebody else, because you can never accurately judge the inner reality of another person, and you may be giving them the biggest and best gift of their life. Just yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay. Thank you so much. Hi, this is Rachel, the host of Self Talk with Rachel Astarte, also known as the best podcast you've never heard. Well, let's see if we can change that. If you would take a moment, please, to hit the subscribe button and maybe even that little bell next to it that lets you know when we release a new episode, which is every other week. Thank you so much.